Quran, Surah 80, Abasa, he frowned. He frowned and turned his attention away, simply because the blind man came to him, interrupting. You never know, O Prophet, perhaps he may be purified, or he may be mindful, benefiting from the reminder. As for the one who was indifferent, you gave him your undivided attention, even though you were not to blame if he would not be purified. But as far as the one who came to you, eager to learn, being in awe of God, you were inattentive to him. But no, this revelation is truly a reminder. So let whoever wills be mindful of it. It is written on pages held in honor, highly esteemed, purified, by the hands of angel-scribes, honourable and virtuous. Condemned are disbelieving humans, how ungrateful they are to God. From what substance did he create them? He created them from a sperm-drop and ordained their development. He then makes the way easy for them, then causes them to die and be buried. Then when he wills, he will resurrect them. But no, they have failed to comply with what he ordered. Let people then consider their food, how we pour down rain in abundance and meticulously split the earth open for sprouts, causing grain to grow in it, as well as grapes and greens and olives and palm trees and dense orchards and fruit and fodder, all as a means of sustenance for you and your animals. Then, when the deafening blast comes to pass, on that day every person will flee from their own siblings, and even their mother and father, and even their spouse and children. For then everyone will have enough concern of their own. On that day, some faces will be bright, laughing and rejoicing, while other faces will be dusty, cast in gloom. Those are the disbelievers, the wicked sinners. And now the Arabic, as recited by Saad al-Ghamdi.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم عبس وتولى أن جاءه الأعمى وما يدريك لعله يزكى أو يذكر فتنفعه الذكرى أما من استغنى فأنت له تصدى وما عليك ألا يزكى وأما من جاءك يسعى وهو يخشى فأنت عنه تلهى كلا إنها تذكرة فمن شاء ذكره في صحف مكرمة مرفوعة مطهرة بأيدي سفرة كرام بررة قتل الإنسان ما أكفره من أي شيء خلقه من نطفة خلقه فقدره ثم السبيل يسره ثم أماته فأقبره ثم إذا شاء أنشره كلا لما يقض ما أمره فلينظر الإنسان إلى طعامه أنا صببنا الماء صبا ثم شققنا الأرض شقا فأنبتنا فيها حبا وعنبا وقضبا وزيتونا ونخلا وحدائق غلبا وفاكهة وأبا متاعا لكم ولأنعامكم فإذا جاءت الصاخة يوم يفر المرء من أخيه وأمه وصاحبته وبنيه لكل امرئ منهم يومئذ شأن يغنيه وجوه يومئذ مسفرة ضاحكة مستبشرة ووجوه يومئذ عليها غبرة ترهقها قترة أولئك هم الكفرة الفجرة.
This surah has 42 lines, but really just two parts. And we'll only be focusing on one of those two parts for the most part. It's the first 10 lines that will be our focus here. We'll go on. I found something later on that's kind of interesting, but the main focus will be on the first 10 lines. So all due respect to the latter part of the surah, but a lot of it is stuff you've heard before. It just is. And the first 10 lines tell something different, something you've never heard before. They tell a fascinating story as well. So I want to focus there. Now, this whole thing, including the somewhat standard sermon that follows the first 10 lines, it comes in response to a specific incident in Muhammad's early ministry in Mecca. Muhammad frowned is a direct reference to this. It doesn't say Muhammad frowned, actually. It says he frowned. That's a direct reference to this incident I'm about to tell you about. It is Muhammad, actually, who is even being rebuked by God. And what you read into this rebuke by God also says a great deal on how positively and complexly that you view the ministry of Muhammad and how credible his revelations were. And we'll get to that. But first, let's go over the story itself. It actually has a very gospel-y quality to it in some ways. Only in this case, the person learning the lesson is actually the prophet. It's Muhammad, who's learning the lesson and really should have known better. So here we have Muhammad. Now, Muhammad is talking about Islam to some very important people. And I mean really important people, really influential people. So if Muhammad could convince them, it could mean a cascade of believers in Mecca. So from a purely functional standpoint, this makes a great deal of sense. The easiest way to get large numbers of converts would be to convert the men who could order the conversion of an entire clan. And powerful influencers, he could get these people on his side. So you can try to put yourself in Muhammad's mindset here. He's playing chief diplomat at some important summit. Just imagine a president at a state dinner with world leaders, and they're talking about important alliances and maybe a war strategy, and then stunningly, out of nowhere, the waiter tries to pull the president aside and ask for some advice. And that's kind of what happened here. Muhammad is making his pitch, and while he's doing this, he's approached by a blind man. Now, this blind man may or may not have been a Muslim at the time, accounts vary. And this blind man, some say it was a guy named Ibn Maktum. He was now a nobody at the time of this, but later, possibly, he was actually the governor of Medina. But anyway, at the time, he's not any of that. He's this low-status blind man who begins asking Muhammad about the Quran and asking him to clarify some passage that he had heard. Passage or passages, I don't know. How does Muhammad react? Well, Muhammad sees and hears the blind man, but he's focused on his supposedly more important work. So he frowns and turns away from the blind man. And I don't see this as an ordinary frown. Think of it as the look you may give a misbehaving child in public. Kind of an authority figure trying to give a, no, can't you see I'm busy kind of a look. So why did he do this? Well, in Muhammad's mind, he had more important things to do. It's also a bit reminiscent of when Jesus' disciples turn away the children trying to come to Jesus. And like Jesus, Muhammad turns this sort of short-sightedness, in this case his own short-sightedness, into a teachable moment. And that's where we get the first 10 lines in the sermon that follows. This surah lays out some of the egalitarian visions of Islam. Perfection belongs to God alone, and all men are created equal in the eyes of God. And those on the bottom can teach those at the top. And how often the truth is revealed to the poor and wretched and the childlike, rather than to sages and scholars, and even in this case, prophets. No one is self-sufficient. Both Muhammad and the blind man are equally reliant on God, and the poor blind man is equal in importance to the great leaders he may have been talking to at the moment. Which brings us to the competing theories of the Quran itself. Now, as a story, this is the kind of thing that gives credibility to the idea that Muhammad is really reciting verses coming from a source other than himself. If Muhammad were some kind of cynical trickster, this wouldn't make a lot of sense. He would be condemning his own short-sightedness and foolishness. So, in the Islamic version, this is God rebuking his prophet, and that kind of puts some points on the board in favor of his credibility. It's a pattern that I believe did give him credibility at the time, at least in the early days. Now, what Muhammad became, particularly in the Christian view, is something else. And really, if you're of a certain age, you should understand that easy labels do not apply to most people, and especially to epic, influential figures like Muhammad. So again, does this make Muhammad more believable? Less believable? I mean, I'd certainly learn toward more believable, but that's really in the eyes of the beholder. But it also raises some interesting questions for later Muslim theologians, such as, was Muhammad sinless? Was he not? Does the fact that God is rebuking him mean he may not actually be an infallible interpreter of the Quran? I mean, he's clearly not infallible here. From the mouth of Muhammad with words that he claims are coming from God, he made a mistake. So, how far across the board do you apply that? Where do you draw the line? For example, perhaps Muhammad is not a perfect sinless man, but he is the perfect interpreter of the Quran. If perfection is an attribute of God alone, just how perfect? And in what ways of perfection? Which of those apply to Muhammad himself? So that's the story of the first 10 lines. And it's just something to really kind of think about, particularly if you're making, sort of giving a historical judgment of Muhammad, what Muhammad really was, particularly if you're not a Muslim. But also, for Muslim theologians, it's just loaded with stuff to ponder about Muhammad and his relation to God and his relation to the Quran. So we have that. And like I said, much of what follows is, let's not say standard Islamic boilerplate, but more stuff we have just gone over already. However, there is one more part of this surah that I do want to highlight among all of that. There's no Arabic in this one, by the way. Well, at least not much. There isn't anything that's super theologically important or out of the ordinary or something that needs that much more explanation. Okay, so one more thing. I want to focus on the lines 17 through 23 of this surah. I'm going with a more literal Pickthall translation here. What I read at the beginning was the clear Quran, but this interpretation, I think, it helps drive home the nature of man being suggested here. All right, so lines 17 to 23 go, man is self-destroyed. How ungrateful. From what thing does he create him? From a drop of seed, he creates him and proportions him, then makes the way easy for him, then causes him to die and buries him. Then, when he wills, he brings him to life again. No, but man has not done what he commanded him. Now, why is that so important? Why is that interesting? It's because of what here is being said about humans. This is kind of the Islamic version of original sin, although it's not tied back to Adam. Now, it's unclear if this means all humans or just the wicked ones who will go to hell. But that is a very, very big thing, how you interpret these verses. Are all humans naturally wicked or just some? There is plenty of room for interpretation here. Now, just look at that first line again. Man is self-destroyed. That's one way to say it. You see this also as man is ungrateful. Man is destroyed. Man is cursed. Man is self-destructive. And of course, man is disbelieving. Now, disbelief, it's the most obvious from the Arabic way to interpret this. The most by the book, easy way to interpret this, because the root of that word in the Arabic is the famous or infamous, depending on your interpretation, 3 letters, kaf, fa, ra, K-F-R. The term kufr, or disbeliever, it comes from this verb. Now, in the Islamic context, it's pretty much the worst thing you can say about a person or a group of people. So this isn't good. No one's going to argue that. But what they are going to argue is the Quran saying this about certain people? Or is it saying this about mankind as a whole? Now, this is critical, and unfortunately, it's not super clear which is which here. You have various interpreters, all of whom I respect. Some come down on one side of this, some come down on the other. And the key parts to look at are in lines 17 and 23. The key part when you're looking at this is what pronoun is being used. Now, what you see in the Arabic is the masculine third person. He. He is this. He is that. But few translate it into English that way. It's either mankind is this, mankind is that, or some wicked humans are this, and some wicked humans are that. Now, who's right? The problem, linguistically, there's not much to lean on here. It's more of a contextual thing. How are you reading the surrounding text? Well, the argument for a more universal reading here, all of mankind, is in what is being described in this section. Things like being created, being nurtured, dying, being buried, being resurrected. These are not things that just happen to certain men, but things that happen to all men. And even later in the Surah, where more of the benefits God has bestowed are listed, you'll see the pronoun you. And it really, really sounds like it's talking about God's nurturing of and God's gifts to all of humanity. Thus, you have some of these translations that mankind in general is inherently flawed. Now, any Christian would certainly agree with that, and some Muslims too. But they would probably just differ from Christians on what the flaw is and where it came from, how it came to be. However, you can also see how a Muslim might slip into some Christian terrain here regarding the nature of man. And I think that's where the later translators get some motivation. This is what they have in mind. I don't know this for a fact. This is speculating. This is what they're thinking about when they're going through something like this. Translations like the Sahih International or the Mustafa Kitab Clear Quran. It's in these more modern translations that you start to see an emphasis on specific, evil, individual humans. Now, my guess is that the later writers were just doing this with a specific theology in mind, whereas someone like Pickthall just kind of gives you the text, take it wherever you want to take it. And to be fair, Christian translators do this too. This is not just an Islamic thing. And not just because they may already adhere to some particular sect of Christianity, but because many are driven simply by the desire to present the truth as they see it to a common reader. And that's probably what happened here. If someone like Mustafa Kitab is going through this and saying, well, I know for a fact that original sin is not really a thing, so it would be a disservice to my reader to translate this in a way that may give the average reader the impression that the Quran endorses that. That would make his mind go there. Now, whether you appreciate that approach or not is up to you, but it is something to definitely keep in mind when reading any religious text. Does this person have an agenda? If so, what is it? And is that something I'm comfortable with? It pretty much comes down to who you trust or which institutions you trust, and whether you believe that the Word of God, through whichever medium it is being conveyed to you, is still pure by the time it reaches you. Thank you, and I'll talk to you next time, inshallah.